everyone. We are live with the Dictators once again, and I'm delighted to introduce my co-host, David Dubato. He will in a minute introduce some of his platforms, and I strongly recommend you sort of follow, especially in these dark times. David's writings is something I would say of a light beacon, albeit the glare of that beacon can be quite harsh, and many people can't look in the full glare of the truth because it's, it demands action. When you see the truth of what's going on, it demands quite serious and responsible action. That's a difficult thing for most people to do. We're going to cover so many things this afternoon. We're going to start with Trump's taco. We're going to talk about the so-called negotiation between Russia and the US over Ukraine's head. Of course, it's not a negotiation. It's a sellout. And we're going to cover various other topics as well. Before I ramble on anymore, David, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm always glad to be here. This is the Dictators. This is our 5 times a week, Monday through Friday live stream that we started a while back. And we are focusing on enough dictators and wannabe dictators. And as Jonathan said, I have some of my own platforms, and I'll put something up here. I have a YouTube channel also, No Delusion Zone. I also have a Substack, Protecting the Republic. So I would encourage you, of course, to go to my YouTube, No Delusion Zone, watch it, subscribe, tell others about it, as well as my website, which is Protecting the Republic. As Jonathan said, we're going to cover a couple of things today, both Ukraine and Iran. The center of it, of course, is that deranged individual, Grandfather Trump, the king of delusion. And I want to open briefly, and we talked about this off air. One of the things that bothers me a lot, and there's a lot about Trump, is the fact that journalists, Jonathan, focus on, at least in the United States, that Trump is losing in popularity overall, that MAGA especially is crumbling, that what he's doing with the economy, what he's doing with the war in Iran, what the failures he's had in Ukraine, and how he's, kissing Putin's ass and all of that, is causing MAGA to fragment, to turn against him. I want to play something very briefly, if I could, at the outset. And this shows how MAGA is not losing faith in Trump. If anything, they support him more than ever. This specifically has to do with the war in Iran, but it's for everything. So just please watch this brief video and you'll see what I'm talking about.
CNN just forced to report this.
Okay, MAGA GOP on the U.S. military action in Iran. Look at this. Nearly 9 in 10, 89% approve of the U.S. military action in Iran. That is the MAGA GOP base. Just 9% disapprove of it. This is tremendously popular among the Republican base.
That's what I'm talking about, baby.
That's what I'm talking about, baby. So MAGA has not left Trump. They, in fact, love all of the destruction of the economy as well as the Middle East and the world economy. So, Jonathan, all of the reports that I see from the press, especially the liberal press in the West, the United States, is utter BS. MAGA has not abandoned Trump. And if we have the time, I want to talk about what's going on with ICE and the elections, the airports right now, and the elections that are coming up in November. So, as they say, over to you. You are muted. Jonathan, can't hear you.
I'm muted.
We need to hear your golden voice. Don't do that.
Technical things. Am I back? Am I back there? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. So over to you about what I babbled about, and
Okay.
we'll move on to Ukraine and Iran.
Yeah. Well, this confuses me because the right-wing podosphere, the podcast bros and girls, seem to very broadly turn against this. We have Marjorie Taylor Greene, we have Nick Fuentes, we have Tucker Carlson, we have Joe Rogan, we have actually the whole community, even though they might pretty much loathe each other. The only person seemingly fully behind the war is Ben Shapiro. And, he is something of a contrarian.
Well, let
You know,
me
he's
jump
known
on
not
that
for
because
towing the line. So
you're absolutely
yeah,
right.
why are they not
Well,
influencing the
a
MAGA sphere? I don't.
very brief thing on that, because that's what everybody is saying. You got Joe Rogan, you got Margie Taylor Greene. They're all against the war in Iran. They're turning their backs on Trump. Very briefly. No, MAGA is not divided on the Iran war. Sometimes journalists indulge in myths and delusions they claim to decry. This grating inclination has been almost on giddy display since the war in Iran. The idea that MAGA has fractured is fantasy. Disquiet is not rupture. Dissent is not a rebellion. The MAGA movement is not a conventional coalition held together by consensus around a coherent, considered set of principles or policy. MAGA remains, as it always has been, a political phenomenon built to burnish one man's ego and narcissism. As long as that man is Trump, the movement, in quotes, bends to his designs and whims. It adjusts and inevitably snaps back into loyal line, just as all cults do. So these people on the podcast that capture everybody's attention because they've got millions of subscribers make it look to journalists and others that, yes, MAGA is splintering, it's shattering, they're turning against Trump. No, these are individuals who are gauging the wind and see that, maybe if I say this now, I'll actually gain more subscribers or get more attention to me, which is true. Look what we're talking about. That does not represent MAGA, not the average American who voted for Trump 3 times and loves him now more than ever. And that's the danger that we're in right now, Jonathan.
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, of course, we didn't mention Fox News or state regime media, as people on Midas Touch and Bulwark call it. They haven't split, have they? I mean, they are broadly still behind MAGA and echoing the talking points. Really not dissimilar from the kind of news quality you might get in North Korea. I mean, let's be frank, and sycophancy. Something darker suggests itself to me here, which is that if he hasn't lost his core base and we're heading into a period of extreme economic turmoil, rising prices and so on, rather than looking rationally at this, his base and many others may be looking around for a scapegoat. So again, with our rational heads on, we're thinking, right, this is going to destroy him. This is going to wreck him. He's not going to be able to bring these high oil prices down, etc. This is going to finish his regime off. Actually, it may entrench his regime, because if he can find the suitable scapegoat for people's anger and rage and frustration, and now we come onto ICE at airports, ICE in election queues, if he can turn that around and find a scapegoat, actually, does this play in his favor?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what all authoritarians do and dictators. They look for an enemy. They look for someone to blame. And then they get their followers to focus on that. Right now, it's Iran. And, well, it's always been the Democrats. So it's going to be the Democrats and Iran. Iran, of course, is responsible for the spike in oil prices, for the spike in food prices, for the spike in, God forbid, real estate prices and mortgage rates. They're the boogeyman. They're the devil. So he's going to ride that one as long as he can. He's always ridden the Democrats. They're responsible for the airports being shut down. And we didn't talk about this. I'll throw it in. For ICE now, folks, ICE is being deployed at U.S. airports because TSA agents, the security agency in charge of airport security here, hasn't been paid in almost 2 months. They're walking off the job. They're quitting. So as of yesterday, ICE has been deployed at major U.S. airports. They may be deployed to all U.S. airports very, very soon. That's a nightmare. Not only are they not trained to do that, they're not very well trained at all. They're masked. They are well armed, heavily armed. They're thugs. And God knows what they're going to do and how they're going to treat passengers at airports. And to make it worse, Jonathan, Steve Bannon, former advisor to the Trump White House, just said yesterday in a quote that what is happening with ICE being deployed for security at U.S. airports, major American airports, is just a test, a dry run for the Republicans, for MAGA to take over, to control the polling places come this November's election, just as Trump has threatened, just as the Project 2025 has laid out in their guidebooks. So these are dark times. I wouldn't advise anybody coming right now to America on a tourist visa. They may be in for a big surprise.
Yeah, especially if you are, dare I say it, not pure as the driven snow in terms of your skin color. We know that there is a strong prejudice that runs through the actions. Although some of their victims, of course, have been white US citizens as well.
Sure.
René Nicole Good, of course, comes to mind in that instance. So these are people full of hate, but often it is racially motivated hate as well. This situation in the airport, does that mean they're going to fully replace passport officers, or are they going to supplement those people on doing the sort of passport control duties who decide that they don't want to work if they're not going to be paid for it?
Well, you've got it's a good question, because ICE now has, they haven't been paid, but their budget is DHS rather, with the new budget, has the largest budget of any security force and most armies on earth. So once they do get beyond this budget impasse, it's going to be a lot less expensive for them, Jonathan, to just fire all of the TSA employees that have been doing security at the airports and replace them with untrained or very, very undertrained ICE agents. They'll just hire a whole new slew of them. Look, if they only have to go to a school for 4 weeks instead of the 3 or 4 months that they used to do, and given a free pass to do whatever they need to find illegal aliens and keep things calm at the airport, sure, they will fire TSA, and ICE will then be the security at U.S. airports. They will save a ton of money in the budget, and this will be a holy hell. This will be a daily nightmare at U.S. airports.
And the optics are going to be appalling. We've already seen a video of one woman, clearly not white, with a small daughter, basically being sat upon. Now, they do not present evidence. They don't even seem to really question people. They simply jump to conclusions, and then they physically jump on the person. This particular scene, you had a bunch of police goons just standing and gawping while this woman was assaulted in an airport. What's going on here? Because I like to think that British police would not tolerate an assault, even by official figures, in public when it's being recorded. That scenario has not really been tested. But what's going on here? What will be going through the heads of those police officers, and what jurisdiction do they have to intervene?
Well, if you're referring to local police officers at the airport watching federal ICE agents, right now it's fuzzy, because until ICE deployed at the U.S. at airports, the local police, usually either city police or sheriff's deputies, had total control, because there was no federal law enforcement at the security checkpoints. They were in the airport, but they were only called if there was a security incident that needed additional backup, additional resources. So now that ICE is going to be the primary security force, when people go through that magnetometer, they're going through the security checkpoint. And if the local police see them brutalizing passengers, I don't know exactly, except that I would say airports are federal property for the most part. They are located in local jurisdictions, of course, but TSA was a federal agency. ICE is part of Department of Homeland Security, a federal agency. In the States, usually the federal agencies have, I hate to say the word Trump, they have authority over local agencies. However, and this is complicated, if a police officer or a sheriff's deputy sees an ICE agent brutalizing a citizen, that's a crime, even for ICE. The local police officer has an obligation to stop that crime, to protect the citizens. So I guess what I'm saying, as a former police officer, this is going to create an incredible problem to sort this all out, where a local police officer is witnessing ICE brutalizing an American citizen, or even an undocumented alien, as they say, undocumented American, brutalizing them and trying to step in and intervene, both heavily armed. This is a nightmare, Jonathan. That's what I'm saying. American airports are about to descend into a nightmare phase if ICE takes over security at American airports. And I think we might have lost Jonathan. I think ICE may have actually gotten to him, maybe be brutalizing him as we speak, and I'm taking him away. That I hope is not the case. He's had some technical issues just prior to going online. And I just want to say that, again, to reiterate, Steve Bannon, who is a complete idiot, has made a formal statement, and he's got the president's ear, that this is a dry run, a test for what's going to happen during the November elections, folks. I've said that the elections are not going to be canceled. That was a fear not too long ago, that Trump would cancel the elections. He can't really do that, at least not easily, but he can easily interfere with the elections. One of the best ways is intimidation, deploying either National Guard troops, or in this case, ICE, to all polling stations. Just their presence there is going to intimidate people who do not have all their documentation. They're even going to intimidate American citizens who are fearful that they're going to be identified as someone who shouldn't be there, undocumented or just illegal, and pulled out of line, arrested, or worse. This is going to have major, major effects on the elections. Not only that, after the elections are over, MAGA has threatened to deploy people, their own people, to count all the ballots. And it's not how many people vote in an election, Jonathan. It's who counts the votes. So they're going to intimidate people going in, and then they're going to count their votes going out. That's a recipe for a permanent Republican fascist government in America, if that's carried out successfully.
And I have to ask the question, are there people who have the stomach for this? We're thinking of spineless Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, who just shut down the legislature yesterday, which he seems to be doing on like a hair trigger every other day. It's like, everybody out, right? We'll come back in a week or two later. It seems that there's no real pushback at the moment, but they must fear. I mean, I want to bring this back. I want to bring this back to what Trump is afraid of, because we're talking about what he might do to impose his will, but these are also driven by paranoia and fears, and as in every authoritarian regime, he's tackling in Iran because he fears the consequences of ground troops and the economic pushback. He fears that the US is isolated, which of course it is, because now it seems that if you pay a couple of $1 million to Iran, they will let all your ships through. And everyone's decided, yeah, we'll do that. That's actually more dependable. Our adversary, get this, is more dependable, and their statements more believable, and their word more trustworthy. That is the Iranian theocratic regime, than the United States. So he's seeing this, and this is probably upsetting him, really pissing him off. He also fears, I guess, loss of impunity at home, that if the election goes ahead, numerous processes, legal processes, investigatory processes will begin against him and his gargantuan grift and past crimes.
Well, as the Treasury Secretary and member, not a member of Mensa, Scott Bessent, said that, look, it makes perfect sense to do some jujitsu by allowing Iran to ship their oil, to give it back to them, to allow them now to get the benefits, to sell their oil. Why stop the oil of our enemy? Why stop the enemy that we are bombing into oblivion from selling their own oil and keeping their government functioning, to keep their heads above water? He said it's really smart and clever what President Trump is doing. He said the word jujitsu. We're turning it back on them. Instead of cutting off their oil, we're going to allow them to sell it. Isn't that brilliant? That's Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary. And why is the Treasury Secretary talking about national security and oil prices? Also, I have to ask you a question, Jonathan. Is Donald Trump actually in negotiations with Iran right now? He's made a lot of statements recently talking about about how he's negotiating, how behind the scenes he's talking with the leadership of the Iranian government, and that they may be close to a deal. Is that what's really going on?
I suspect that there may be some back channels, or more realistically, maybe he's talking to Vladimir Putin, his buddy, who is conveying messages to him. I also thought, I didn't call the episode this, but I also think that Putin is probably saying, listen here, Donald, right? This thing, it's gone really well so far, and you are a strategic genius, but you got to start winding it up now, or you got to dial it down at least. Because as I've said all along, what Moscow wants out of this situation, whether they initiated it or not, and that's up for debate, what they want is a rumbling, ongoing crisis lasting months. They want the US to be divided from its allies. They want oil prices to be high. They don't necessarily want the regime in Iran to fall. At the moment, that is going exactly their way. If, however, we start getting widespread attacks on desalination plants and oil infrastructure right across the region, well, that could go further. That could send the whole global economy into a tailspin. And to an extent, I think Putin has to keep an eye on what Xi and China want. China does not want that level of strategic chaos. They are aligned, I think, partly in what Putin wants, which is America to be a basket case, divided from its allies and betraying every principle that they once held. They want America to become an anti-America, a mockery of all of its former values. And through their vessel, Donald Trump, they are achieving that. But they have to keep him on quite a tight leash, because it seems that he can be dragged in all sorts of different directions, depending on the last person he spoke to.
Well, much has been said, including by me, about the upside of the war in Iran for Russia and Putin specifically, his survival. Jonathan, you are an expert and one of my very go-to people on Russia. What would you say are the biggest downsides and the biggest dangers to Putin specifically, but Russia generally, in the Iran war, especially if it continues for any length of time?
I think the biggest danger for them has been averted, and that was a decapitation of the Iranian regime, a popular uprising, and images of would-be Iranian Democrats or monarchists or whoever's taking over, trampling the symbols of autocracy, seeing autocrats and their henchmen strung up in the streets. That is the absolute worst case scenario for Vladimir Putin. And I think he must fear that this came very, very close to it. However, what they're left with is all upside. The regime remains and is perhaps in some ways more dependent on Russia as an ally. Russia can step in, give them assistance. This was another disingenuous moment where a minion of the Trump regime came onto TV yesterday and claimed that Russia wasn't helping Iran, and this is fanciful and that's all rumor. Absolutely not. There's intelligence data that's being provided, targeting data. Yeah. There's updates, the shaheeds and the guidance systems and the shared knowledge of tactics and some technical detail from their war in Iran. This is going on a multi-level support. Where does Iran's nuclear program come from in the first place, for goodness sake? It is built by Russian engineers and with Russian technology, and almost certainly with Russian material as well, which makes me wonder why the Rosatom has not been seriously sanctioned or much talked about during this whole conflict. So there's levels and levels of stupidity going on. But for a Trump regime minion to come on and say that Russia really has nothing to do with the Iranian regime is ludicrous. Russia has been colluding with Iran to say unleash the Houthis. This is another interesting aspect. We haven't seen the Red Sea shut down. We haven't seen the Houthis in action. I would imagine that Iran has many layers of escalation still available to it, whether Trump realizes it or not. The other story that we covered on the channel is a huge aid convoy passing through Tajikistan. almost certainly that's not sourced in Tajikistan because they are one of the poorest countries in the region. This reminds us very much of the so-called humanitarian aid convoy during the occupation of the Donbass, the insurgency supported by Russia. Russia is almost certainly supplying Iran with material, weaponry, intelligence, technology, tactical information, etc., helping them to kill Americans and destroy American assets. And then you have the US lifting sanctions, giving a vast financial windfall to Iran and China. And the same regime goon was like crowing. I think this was Besant saying basically, well, this is a masterful move. This is jujitsu, as you said there, because they'll never see that money. Really? Iran and Russia, who built and defined the idea of a shadow fleet, you think they don't have a shadow financial network to gain that money? I mean, it's either these people are clownishly ignorant, which of course we know they are, or they are disingenuous to the point of absolute criminality.
Talking about the Houthis in the Red Sea, it's been put out in the last couple of days, I think, or maybe longer than that, that Iran did formally request the Houthis, which is one of their proxies, to target the Red Sea, to target any U.S. or Israeli ships that come through there. So effectively shutting that down. And we've got now, Jonathan, 2 U.S. Marine Corps MAUs, Marine Expeditionary Units, steaming towards Iran. And one of them is coming from Camp Pendleton. And the people that are looking into this, the pundits, the analysts, and so forth, are saying, okay, how are they going to get there? California, where Camp Pendleton is very, very far from Iran. They can go east, they can go west. The longer route actually is east through the Panama Canal. But folks are saying, well, yeah, but that's the more dangerous route. Why? Because eventually they would have to transit through the Red Sea to get to Iran. And they would come under attack by the Houthis, who are now under orders by their masters to close that area and attack any American ships that go through there. So they're going the other way, I'm sure. So that's another way of saying we've got 2 Marine Corps Expeditionary Units en route and are going to arrive in the either the Persian Gulf area, the theater, very, very soon. That's between 4,000 and 5,000 Marines that we don't know exactly where they're going to do, if they're going to have an amphibious assault on Karg Island, or they're going to have an airdrop. We don't know, but they're en route. And it's obvious to me, Jonathan, that what's going on, I just put up an overlay there about how Trump lied about being in negotiations with Iran. This is just a stall tactic. Just as Putin has had stall tactics in supposed negotiations with Ukraine, Trump is lying. He's stalling to wait for the Marines to get there, to get all of the moving parts in place so he can launch the next phase of this gamble, this insanity, which is a land war. Whether that takes place first on Karg Island or not, that's what's going on. And that is going to be the next chapter in this catastrophe.
And one wonders whether the MAGA sphere will follow him into this catastrophe, because surely the next step comes with extreme loss of life. I mean, there's no question that this will be substantial, and not necessarily in the initial invasion, but in trying to hold that facility. And then, of course, Iran has potentially thousands of speedboats, self-destructive speedboats, because we can't use the S word. Here we go. Potentially thousands of these, better hidden, in fact, than their leaders were.
Between 20 to 30,000 are the best intelligence estimates of these fast attack boats.
And many, many thousands of shaheeds, which, let's face it, if this was to escalate in this fashion, we would be seeing a lot more of these being unleashed, not just within the region, but potentially, spread far and wide, which would highlight the absolute incapacity of everybody in the world to resist this, except Ukraine. Ukraine is the only country geared up to intercept. And even then, they're hitting 70, 80% of these, which is extraordinary night after night. But that also means that 20% get through, which of
Well,
course
and they've
will
got
be a disaster.
these little beauties that I've put up on the screen now, and just look at this sobering fact. 8,000 ballistic missiles stockpiled every year.
For a
They
year.
estimate
Over
for the
how
last
many years? Yeah.
over 47 plus years. So for
That's
those of
quite
you
a little
better
arsenal they've got there. Yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm not that good at arithmetic or math, but for those that are, that's a lot. That's a whole lot. Even if they shoot a bunch of them down, that's a lot. In addition to, as we were just mentioning, it's approximately, it's believed that they have at least 30,000 of these drones squirreled away underground, thousands of ballistic missiles underground, the locations of which we're not sure. We know where some of them are. That's true, but not where all of them are. And we mentioned yesterday about the strike, the sophisticated and accurate strike into southern Israel, next to their nuclear facility, a research facility in the Negev desert. That shook up a lot of people to know that they have this capability and that the Israelis were not able to shoot it down. They said it was a failure. They admitted a failure of their anti-missile platforms, the Iron Dome. So Iran is not out of missiles. They're not out of drones. They're not out of high-speed boats. Kharg Island, and I won't use the S word, would be a very, very difficult place not to assault, Jonathan. I'm sure that they would take it over, in a matter of hours or days, but holding it would be a nightmare. I wouldn't be surprised if the Iranians actually rig it with explosives and allow the Marines, or God forbid, the 82nd Airborne, to successfully take over the island and then just blow it sky high with no loss of life to Iranians and horrendous loss of life to Americans.
And incredible pollution and all the rest. I mean, for the pollution notwithstanding, that could be extremely detrimental to the health of thousands, tens of thousands of US troops in the area. And we now know that Gulf War syndrome is a real thing. The chemical concoction that people were breathing in has caused lasting health issues. This is going to be something on that order, but
do you remember when Saddam set fire to the oil fields in Iraq? Well, this would be something like that. They could not only blow up the storage tanks, which would be the equivalent of a small nuclear bomb. We discussed that already, but they can just, blow up the pipelines. They could leave it open, the spigot open, just blow it up and set it on fire. And this would be horrible. It would do just what you said, not to mention the long-term worldwide economic disaster, because the Persian Gulf would be shut down then. Why wouldn't the Iranians, after that point, finish mining this area and not allowing anything through?
Exactly. Well, there's many topics I want to cover. There's maybe one that we should cover in this stream, and then tomorrow we were going to talk about the fake negotiations, the fact the US is now overtly acting as a negotiator on behalf of Russia. Let's tackle that one tomorrow, because I think we need quite a bit of time on that one, and more information may well come to light. I'll share some stuff with you, commentary on that from behind the scenes and how it's now absolutely overt. But let's tackle this one, because many people are still flip-flopping and not really understanding the sort of post-truth politics of Trump. When he says, this is over, we're going to attack her, we're going to withdraw, both his supporters and his detractors are like, yes, on the one hand, this makes great strategic sense. On the other hand, look at Trump, he's tackled, etc., etc. But actually what we're really seeing here is an extraordinary manipulation of the markets, because the timing of these announcements doesn't really reflect any reality on the ground, but it is designed to coincide with the opening and closing and weekends of markets. And we can see extraordinary movements of either people sort of cashing in or investing based on what is then predicted to be the movement of the market based on his announcements. So what we're seeing here is perhaps a first in history, which is geopolitics, the reality of millions, hundreds of millions of lives being leveraged in order to swing markets to fill a few pockets.
Well, yeah, and absolutely it is. And this is just another massive grift by Trump and his sycophants. But one thing I hope that comes out of this, I doubt it will, but I'm hoping, is something I've been saying for years, which is the absolute cavernous disconnect between, in the United States, Wall Street and the average American, the American street. These are delusional gamblers. They're just unbelievable. The fact that they would listen to everything that, not just Trump, this goes back to the last depression, actually, where when a president says something or a leader says something, the markets go crazy. And then they realize, oh no, this was a lie, or it's not even vaguely true. And then the markets come down again. The next day, the same thing. Blah, blah, blah. This is insane. I hope people, investors who have the money, realize Wall Street does not represent the American street. It doesn't represent the American economy at all. And right now, all it represents is the multi-billionaires, the tech bros, and the hangers honor who are making mega bucks off of this for the reasons you just said, Jonathan. Not MAGA, but Trump and his sycophants at the top are manipulating the market. And the market is just allowing them to do this. They're taking everything he says as the truth, or at least they're hoping that it's the truth, and the markets go nuts. And then it comes down again, and it goes up and down. It's destroying our economy. There is no credibility, but it's making a very, very, very few amount of tech bros and multi-billionaires even richer. It's increasing the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's a very, very ominous sign for the future, at least, of America.
And the hangers-on at the court of the Orange King in Mar-a-Lago. That also seems to be one of the ways you get in on what's going on, to be in with that circle. It's a pay-to-play, again, so it's a kind of pyramid scheme, a Ponzi scheme. Yes. Let's hope that it collapses soon and that it doesn't take a wider collapse of the entire world order, frankly. Tomorrow, we're going to cover a lot more topics. We're going to move back onto Ukraine. We're going to talk about how the US is now openly advocating from Russian points of view, nothing to do with helping Ukraine. At some point, Ukraine is going to have to step away. You have Mark Rutte, who, quite frankly, well, I'm not going to say, what he's doing, but he is servicing Trump in the most obscene way with absolute sycophancy and appeasement. Yes. What a disgraceful politician, not a leader in any sense whatsoever. He's advocating points of view that most members of NATO do not align with at all, except for one, and so he no longer represents the membership, let alone the leadership of NATO, and needs to go. So we're going to cover that, the Ukrainian point of view, and whatever lunacy Trump has come up with. We might even touch upon extraordinary events in Russia with the entire shutdown of the internet.
There's a lot going on in Russia
tonight.
We haven't had a chance to touch on, and I hope we get to that tomorrow.
Let's get to that tomorrow. Let's make it a sort of Ukraine-Russia themed thing. And, we've got a few more episodes this week. We can dive into more detail on that stuff as well. But another story I'm putting out tonight is one of the Kremlin's propagandists seem to have lost his mind. He's lost his mind and criticized Putin. I almost said Trump, and criticized Putin, and he's been put into a psychiatric hospital. So this,
what a surprise,
extraordinary, delicious story that is. Let's catch up tomorrow, and we'll cover some more of these. And thank you to everyone who's...
I want to address one of your very best followers.
Oh, yeah, please.
Nick, now he just went off there. I can't forget his name. Mythic host or something like that. He was saying how he's sick.
Here we go.
I just want to say, for your pleasure, Mythic Plague, one more time, Trump is the worst American president in American history. So I hope that makes you happy, because I know you like to hear that. So I'll say that every day if you want. He's by far the worst. And I hope he becomes the first American president to serve in a maximum security penitentiary.
The most corrupt by far as well. I fear very much that we're at an inflection point in American history where those who are wealthy have impunity for these things. However, one of the interviews that I'm putting up on the Silicon Curtain channel tonight is with an extraordinary aspiring politician, Adam Dunnigan. People can watch that on Silicon Curtain. And he described the kind of root and branch reform that will be required when Democrats come in. He castigates Democrats just as much as he does Republicans in this episode. He talks about the... how should I say it? The hubris and the general out of touchness of Biden, and the fact that none of these institutional reforms were tackled. Therefore, the system was not given the immunity that it needed. Anyway, it's a great conversation. I also hope that he'll appear on David's channel soon as well, because this is someone
too.
at last speaking truth to power in the US. And I think we need to rally behind such people.
Folks, No Delusion Zone at YouTube. Like, subscribe, as well as my Substack, Protecting the Republic. And I hope to see all of you and more here again with Jonathan tomorrow.
Fantastic. That's a neat little button there. I'll have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
That's great. I like that. Until tomorrow, David, thank you.